Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very thought-provoking show coming right up with special guest David Kutchinski, and he's here today to share with us his new book, Send Packs. Born into a military family, David started his life as a United States Marine. He was in the last all-male OCS in the United States Army, and it was at the top of his class for military intelligence, specializing in remote sensors and aerial platforms. David went on to become a Green Beret as a combat officer, serving 2 tours in Iraq and 1 in Sudan. Later, David was selected to be an FBI agent, where he received 3 letters of commendation personally from the director. So let's welcome to the show, David Kutchinski.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the time.
Oh, my goodness. I mean, soon as I got a hold of your book, I had to have you as a guest on this show. I mean, oh, my goodness, I could not put it down once I started reading it.
Well, there's so much that you could understand better than just the normal people, just from, your show, just listening to it. And it's like, wow, she's going to understand where I'm coming from. It's not, I won't have to connect any dots for Marianne.
Well, hey, I appreciate that. So very kind of you to say. And I've got to ask you, how long did it take you to write this book? I mean, because gosh, I think you knocked this one out of the park.
Well, technically 30 years, but actual probably about 8 months total.
Getting it together and doing the research and the background on that?
Well, the final, I started the research 30 years ago when this brain virus happened to me, and it's bothered me my whole life. And then all of a sudden I was in Iraq, and there was a huge battle, and it dawned on me when my supply person, or the person back at the base, after a very brutal gun battle, said, what do you need? And both of us are Green Berets, and both of us had a problem with the historical version of the Little Bighorn. And so I just wrote, 2 words, the same thing that Custer wrote to Reno, send packs, which it's a military term, packs, meaning ammunition and water. And my unit was really taking care of the terrorists that were trying to take over the power plant in Mosul. And after a very brutal 93 minutes in which they lost, we won. And it's, what do you need? And, I need water and ammunition. And that's when it dawned on me. Custer didn't say, I'm being overrun. And so that's what really started the book when I got back. That was, I guess, the epiphany. And that was when I started getting all this spiritual help of, putting all the pieces together.
Well, and it's interesting. It takes a person with it's basically like this book is meant for you to write, because it takes a person with your, military background, because you were a senior military intelligence officer and a decorated FBI agent, that you could be able to not only write the story the way that you did, but present it in such a way that it really has a solid argument to it.
Exactly. And the reason it's historical fiction and not another book on the Little Bighorn, oh my gosh, I think there's like 600 books on Little Bighorn. None of them, they got it right. So historical fiction gives me, I guess, the freedom to tell everybody what happened. And, the only people that actually know what happened are dead. And as I started delving into it, there were the story from Hollywood, or that everybody believes, started falling apart. And one thing, the FBI, the first day, the first class in the FBI, they quote Sir Arthur Conan Doyle: eliminate the impossible, and all that's left is the truth. And, with my intelligence background, I knew that you never go with one source, ever, never, ever, ever. And I just started picking it apart and going, and what jumped out at me was just phenomenal. I mean, okay, who is this? Who was Custer? I mean, really? Okay, he was this, arrogant fop that, had like flamboyant dress and overinflated ego, and boy, were they wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh. The most important general to cause the end of the Civil War. That's who George Armstrong Custer was.
Mm. It's interesting. You look at that, there's the facts that you were able to unearth. I mean, it appears that history needs to be rewritten in regards to just Custer and Little Bighorn.
All the people that have actually written the books, and I have read way too many of them, none of them been in combat. None of them were ballistics people. And being on a SWAT team and sniper, that's what our life is ballistics. And what you have are the Indians riding on a horse with no stirrups from 500 yards out firing pistol ammunition, whereas you have the very experienced 7th Cavalry firing rifles from a prone position or a supported kneeling position. And and when I saw the casualty figures of 238 troopers dead and 31 Indians, impossible. That's impossible. How could firing pistol rounds at 500 yards versus from a horse with no stirrups? It doesn't work. Again, the impossible. It's impossible. Eliminate the impossible. All that's left is the truth. Is that he was combat ineffective at the end of that quote unquote massacre. Custer's last stand. I just hate that term.
Well, and, on that topic, how has Hollywood and the press really painted Custer as a buffoon and failure? I mean, do you feel like that's even correct?
Not even close. Not even close. I mean, he loved his men, and he would never throw away their lives, which was evidenced in many, many encounters in the Civil War. I mean, the reason that nobody in the Union liked him, or the other Union generals, was the fact he led from the front. Okay, does that make him arrogant? No, that makes him a fantastic combat commander. And the reason he had all the floppy hats and the cravat is so that in a sea of blue, which it was, hundreds of blue uniforms, they could see where their commander was. And if anybody who's been in combat knows that the plan goes out the window the second the first round's fired. And, he loved his men, unbelievably courageous, and always led from the front. And I'm sure what he said in my book, he said, at the very end, it was like, I'm sorry. I didn't know I would be betrayed like this. And the way that it ended for the 7th Cavalry was nothing like Hollywood shows them going, oh, mommy, mommy, with their hands up. The 7th Cavalry of 1876 were the most elite of the elite. So basically, they were the Green Berets of today. And having been a Green Beret for over 30 years, I can tell you that if we're surrounded and we're about to be overrun, what we're going to do is, and it's on the cover if you can look real close, we're going to call in Broken Arrow. And that means we're about to be overrun, and those poor sons of bitches are going to take it, because we're not going down slow.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting when you start, reading Sen Pax and the story unfolds, just how much of this part of history we really don't have right, in my opinion. I mean, I'm looking at this and I agree with you. I think a lot of the things it doesn't make sense. And, when we look at Custer, I mean, he was in the Civil War, right?
Yes. Yeah. From the start to the end. He was the first, as a captain, he was the first Union officer to take a rebel colors. In other words, the rebel flag. He was the first one. The other part, which is fascinating, is he was the first forward observer in history, because he went up in a balloon with a telegraph, and he called in artillery fire from the balloon. He was the first person to do that too. So he was always on the cusp, on the front.
Mhm. I mean, it's interesting. Cowards don't lead from the front. That doesn't happen.
No, they don't.
People,
no,
there are heroes that do that, and so he definitely was a hero, and it's interesting how he really distinguished himself in combat.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, a lot of your readers, I'm sure, are either from back east, or they have at least traveled there. And what you find out is it's not like the West. There's these huge trees everywhere, and it's rolling hills. And what Custer could do, he could put the battle space in his head, and he would tell the artillery, fire in that direction, charge 6, and then skedaddle. And constantly he was outnumbered. I mean, almost every major encounter that Custer was in, he was outnumbered. And he always came through with victory. I mean, Jeb Stuart outnumbered him 4-1 right before Gettysburg. And he fought him to a standstill to where Jeb Stuart couldn't be there for Lee when Lee needed him. Because one guy, George Armstrong Custer. And he's just, besides that, he's real. I mean, everybody portrays him as this, two-dimensional, robot. When in fact, if you read about him, he was romantic. I mean, he married the prettiest girl who was, she was the prettiest girl. How did they put it? From Michigan, and she was the prettiest girl in a town famous for pretty girls. And it's just, and Libby Custer. You read her writings, that she wrote afterwards, and it's like, no, none of this, none of the portrayal of Custer is correct.
It's interesting. You really interweave the, portions of their love story within 10 Packs. And we're not going to give too much of it away, but there's a lot of romance that happens in this book with the main character, David Cole. And so you are reading this book, and I've had my girlfriends say, gosh, they got the book, they started reading it, and then they really got into it because it has this huge romance piece that most people aren't expecting.
Yes, even my editor. She said what you said, and probably most people, if they look back, okay, he was a Lieutenant Colonel Green Beret, he was an FBI agent, he worked at the National Labs, he's got 3 patents. Oh, I know what this is going to be. Boring. And that's not true. It's not true. I mean, it's historical fiction allows you that freedom to tell the truth. And, what we're finding out, there's a lot of things. Like what really motivated me to finally, go down the path was the discovery they found out there really was a King Arthur. And Merlin, he may not have been a magician, but he was a spiritual leader. And, the whole thing of Excalibur, which is, I found fascinating. Excalibur, the famous sword of Arthur. You've heard that?
Oh, yes.
Where it could cut other swords in half. Mm-hmm. And, everybody's going, well, that was Merlin magic. Actually, it wasn't, because Gladius Hispania is the Roman short sword. And as Rome was falling down, the Roman short sword became a sword instead of just a short sword. And they couldn't send it back, and it had the finest steel in the world, which is Spanish steel. And so what they did is they just, they'd heat it up and hammer it down and fold it over, heat it up, hammer it down. What are we talking about? Anybody that knows metallurgy knows we're talking about the samurai sword. It's making, every time they pound it back out, it's sharper, it's stronger. So, yeah, it would go right through the Saxon swords. And, everybody was saying, oh, it's a myth, it's a myth. And, it always bothered me about the 7th Cavalry, and the 7th Cavalry didn't do that. I mean, what I had in the book, that's how it ended. I mean, they died with multiple arrows and bullets in them, still killing. And that's the spirit of the 7th Cavalry.
Well, and that's something that we would expect from our elite fighting forces here in the U.S.,
Exactly, and that's what they were. And, the whole point that Hollywood and all these other academians, if I can say that, is that I don't think that's an expletive yet. And, they're going, well, all of Custer's men hadn't been in the Army more than a year. They hadn't been in the American Army. They had been part of the British Army, the French Army, and definitely the Germans, and just came back from the Franco-Prussian War, which was basically a huge cavalry fight. So, no, they hadn't been in the Army, maybe a year, the U.S. Army. But they were experienced cavalrymen. They were experienced, and they were hardcore, and they were hard fighting. And there were a lot of Irishmen with them. So you can't get an Irishman in a fight without coming out on top. And if not, a lot of the blokes are going to be hurting.
Well, and you've got some Irish characters within the book that lend to that dialect, and so it's interesting just how the book has all these pieces interwoven, and it makes me kind of wonder, how was Custer thought of by the Confederate forces,
Well, that's a really good question, because you're known by your enemies, and the enemies had the greatest respect for him. Okay, what are you talking about, David? How do you get something so obtuse and get any proof on it? How about the proof that the surrender document of the Civil War was signed on a small desk, and that desk was given to the general unanimous. The North and the South decided this, that desk should go to the general that made that day happen more than any other, and that went to George Armstrong Custer. So the South, when they were ready to surrender and they were just setting up, where to do it at Appomattox, the head of the, right under Robert E. Lee was Longstreet. Mm-hmm. And so they sent him out to tell Custer, hey, quit fighting. We're surrendering. And Custer told him, hey, surrender to me right now. I'm going to keep fighting. And he was, he was a great, I think our greatest cavalry commander in the history of the United States Army. I mean, he was like Alexander the Great, who was famous for seeing the battle space and, reacting to it, which is how he could defeat people that, 80 times his number, like with Darius, and, just kick butt. And so that he would forget all that, I mean, the same thing at the Little Bighorn happened to him during the Civil War. So he had actually been in that situation, and he knew what to do. So the whole 31 casualties of the Indians was, I hate to say it, but that was a figment of Grant's imagination to make Custer look bad.
And there's a whole lot and we're not going to kind of get into that here, because I think it's part of what makes this story so intriguing. But there's a reason why Custer is really...
Absolutely. Set up. Set up would be the word. Mm-hmm. He was set up. Yeah. Everybody goes, whoa, that's not realistic. Well, come on, let's get in a little room, where there's nobody listening, and I'll tell you what's happened, in the modern Army of setting up commanders in the field, Yeah,
just how that is.
Does anybody remember Tillman? The NFL star that after 9/11 joined the Rangers, the Army Rangers, mm-hmm. And then he was killed by friendly fire, and we didn't know about that for 4 months. So don't tell me it can't happen, and especially if it's coming straight from the White House.
Yeah, because that definitely does happen, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Well, and as we look at this story, what was Custer doing right before the Battle of Little Bighorn?
He was in Washington, D.C., testifying against the president's brother, who was embezzling, modern-day amount of money, $500,000 a year, embezzling from the Indian Fund. And Custer was also the officer in charge of going into the Black Hills and trying to get all the miners out of there, because the Black Hills is what we gave to the Sioux. And so he was back there and talking to congressmen, who, of course, their word is good for about 5 minutes, because he said, okay, well, I'll do this, but you got to give me good ammunition, which they had copper instead of brass. And that's in the book, too, about how unbelievable that is, that they would give any combat unit ammunition that they knew would jam. And when I say jam, I know a lot of people don't know what that means. That means that it doesn't function anymore. But copper expands so quickly that once you put it in the chamber and fired it, it would be stuck in the chamber. So you get one shot, and then your weapon's useless. So he was there trying to get that and take care of the Indians, who he respected, the Indian, which is kind of funny that the Indians, we sued Custer. It's like he was just testifying on your behalf that you guys got screwed, on the Black Hills. And all the 300-pound gorillas, as we call them nowadays, but, or carpetbaggers, which is what they were called back then, but they owned all the senators, and, they were making money, and they're getting gold out of the Black Hills. So it's just, Custer, you need to just, shut up. Because Custer was on the Indian side, and he had basically given up his career if it hadn't been for Crook, saying, no, I need Custer on this. This is a very important operation. And I think that's what opened up for Grant and his brother to set him up, through the back channels with Reno.
Yeah. Which, reading that part, it's just so disheartening just how that all came together. It's like, oh, that is horrible. That is absolutely horrible. But, it makes sense, because the rest of it, if we look at history the way it stands, it doesn't make sense.
You're right. Yeah, and that's what kept bothering me. It doesn't make sense. And, Marianne, I actually couldn't finish the book until I had my final question answered, which is, if Custer was such a good combat commander, how come so many of his men died in twos away from the central area of his command? And it wasn't it was like, I remember it was like 3:32 in the morning. I just woke up, just bolt upright, and I knew what happened. And no, I won't go into that. That's in the book. But that will let you know why a lot of his men died in twos, and why that, I guess, solidified how it ended, how I say it ended in the book, because of that. In other words, they didn't go, mommy, 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 don't hurt me, don't hurt me. They were really badly hurt, and they were still fighting and killing.
Yeah. In your book, you portray the Indians as using a straight dialect and not what Hollywood usually predicts, kind of projects them to be. Why did you do it that way?
Well, one thing, I really respect the Indian way. I have no Indian in me, but I've been to several, Sundances and things like that, and helped out, and I really respect it. And so the whole point of, me go eat, I'm going, no, they didn't do that. I mean, they couldn't have. So let's put this in perspective, okay? I believe that the greatest writer that the world has ever seen, and I think he's also a philosopher if you love Shakespeare. Shakespeare only used 17,600 words in all of his plays and writings and everything like that. At the time, there were like 60,000 words that were available, but now there's arguably maybe 180,000 words in the English language. Okay, Shakespeare only used 17,000 of those, and I don't think anybody would argue with me that they're still eloquent. And the Indian, who mastered herbs, when to, how to react to weather, how everything like that, they had to teach that. They couldn't teach that by going, ooh, me look clouds. No, they were probably very eloquent, in their own language, which probably had like 1/10 the number of the English language. And, Shakespeare did a darn good job with 1/10 of the English language.
I really appreciate that you did that, because it brings a lot of respect, to the Indians in portraying them as, not people who are maybe grunting or anything like that, but they're able to really carry on this beautiful dialogue, and we're just kind of behind the eight ball on that.
Well, the other part that let's just say the historians, ignore, and now I know why, is that quite a few Indians actually weren't in battle in the Civil War, but they did support it because they were really good with horses. And so, like, one of my Indian characters actually saw many battles, between the North and the South near the end of the war, and would have come back to the tribe and talked about the Gatling gun, would have talked about airburst artillery, and the whole thing that the Indians, probably didn't believe him because it sounded so fantastic. Hold it, you had one gun that could fire 1,000 rounds a minute? I think he's got too much peyote in him, but it's not true. And Custer, because he had respect for the Indian and didn't want to, all he wanted to do was get him back on the reservation. He wasn't interested at that point. He just wanted to do the mission, or he would have brought his Gatling gun. And the Gatling gun, which was under his command back at Fort Lincoln, was not the .45 caliber that is normal. He had a 1-inch diameter. That's like a 20 millimeter round.
Wow. And
the 20 millimeter is what you knock out tanks with. So imagine that thing firing 1,000 rounds, and it would easily have hit the compound. Or he could have had some of his small spanker cannons, brought those, fired airburst. There wouldn't have been anything left of the Indian. But he chose not to. Not because he was arrogant, like everybody said. He just wanted him, he felt sorry for him, which that, I think, is his only thing that he did wrong.
Well, on that note, we're going to pause here for a quick break. We've been speaking with David Kutchinski in regards to his new book, Send Packs. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. We'll be right back after these messages.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
There comes a moment when you realize you're somewhere special, when you discover that each beautiful creature that you see has been rescued from a life of absolute horror and brought to this incredibly free place. Here's where their lives were forever changed and where yours will as well. Discover over 500 tigers, bears, and lions at the brand new visitor center at the Wild Animal Sanctuary just outside Denver. For more information, visit wildanimalsanctuary.org. Discover true freedom at the Wild Animal Sanctuary.
Have you ever had the sense that your thoughts might actually be doing something? Ancient secrets of manifesting have been masterfully revealed in the award-winning book Manifesting 1-2-3 by Ken Elliott. For the first time, the author's experiences and stories in this book describe exactly how your thoughts can create anything. You've been doing this all your life, but it's never been fully explained for you until now. Visit manifesting123.com for more information today. Manifesting123.com.
There are nearly 2 million Americans living with amputation. Many live right here in San Antonio. Becoming an amputee can be scary, frustrating, isolating, but there's no reason to feel alone. The San Antonio Amputee Foundation is here to help support you and guide you toward resources such as home and car modifications and even prosthetic limbs. For more information or to make a donation, visit saamputee.org. We'll help you live a full, active life, one step at a time. San Antonio Amputee Foundation, healing limbs, hearts, and souls.
Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. We're here today with special guest David Kutchinski, and he's sharing with us his new book, Send Packs. Now, David, before we went for break, I was kind of thinking of a few things, and gosh, this book is extremely thought-provoking. When we look at both sides and how they are armed during this conflict and what happened, it's quite a bit different than what the history books say and what we've been taught.
They fired pistol rounds. It was a pistol round. It was a rim-fire pistol round, and the Indians were not familiar with a lever-action rifle. They were not. It was the trapdoor is what they were used to. And whenever anybody who's ever worked a lever action rifle, if you half cock it, which you could do if you were on a pony without a saddle, trying to put the next round in, you double feed it. And they were not familiar. And of course, any weapon at that time, brand new weapon, which is what they had, it would be stiff. So you have to extend the lever all the way down till it clicks. That means it's grabbed the next round. But if you do it halfway, that means it's taking the ejected round and it's jamming it with the new round. So I can't. Plus, it's a pistol. It's a pistol cartridge. It's not a rifle. Mm-hmm. So yeah, and Custer, which is the only thing the historians talked about, practiced. He definitely practiced with all of his guys were excellent shots. So hitting the Indian when they were 500 yards out, which is what they did, they'd fire in volleys. And when I read the Indian accounts, by the way, the first Indian to be interviewed that was actually at the Little Bighorn was over a year later. So in the FBI, we had the magic 15 minutes. In other words, if I can't talk to a witness within 15 minutes, he's already integrated so much of his life into what happened. I'm not saying it's not the truth. It's a truth in his head, but it's nothing I can take to court. And interviewing somebody after a year is a waste of time as far as, getting evidence.
Yeah, just things change, perspectives. I mean, that happens with car accidents. So, how
right. Yeah. Yeah, you're right.
Like,
good point.
How could people keep things straight, So,
exactly.
Well, and I really applaud you because, my goodness, in your book, every character you have is so three-dimensional. Are they all real people, or is there a mix?
I just had a chill go up my back, Marianne. They're the best of everybody I've known. A lot of them I've lost, so it was wonderful being with them again. But the love, these unknown people, in the 1880s, 1870s, they actually built the West. That's what I want to portray. They weren't these like the women. You look at a Western, and the women are almost like Joan Cleaver. They got everything but the pearls and the vacuum cleaner. No, they were some brilliant, intelligent women out there, on the West, and we lost 800,000 men in the Civil War. 800,000. So there were a lot of them that had to run everything in the West because their husbands were dead. And did they, let me go marry somebody else? No, they took over the ranches. They did it. They carried the weapons. They learned how to use them. They did everything. And so that's another story that I wanted to tell.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad that you did, because it really did portray women as strong and really able to take care of themselves. And some people were kind of new to it, but at the same time, after some education, they were able to really, use that education and that knowledge to further themselves and just be strong women in the book.
And they had to be able to kill. I'm sorry, but that's the truth. And, that was the reality of the West. Whether it be a mountain lion, a bear about to kill you, or an Indian deciding that he wanted to kill everybody in your family, and they did in horrible ways. And so you have to be able to kill them first. And what happens, and when I teach people, combat skills, is that when they get in combat, the mind goes to a certain area because the mind's going, they've never done this before. The mind hasn't seen combat before. And so they go back into the brain looking for muscle memory, and what comes up is what they've been taught. And that's why, like in one of the situations, Dorinda, there's a perfect cavalry dismount and goes into, low ready position. And, she didn't even know she was doing it, but it was, all these guys that had been in combat were going, wow, I haven't seen too many guys be able to pull that off, and here, a girl did it. So I love that scene. I mean, besides the other things that were going on, is that everybody has it in them. And you never know what's going to happen until you've been in your first toss-up. You can be the fancy shooter in the world, but you don't know how you're going to react when, it's for real.
Mm-hmm. That's why it takes someone with your, very unique background and skill set to write this book. Because if we're talking about, people who've been in the military, warriors, people who are out there protecting, our country, and that's what these people were, these gentlemen were doing at the time, it takes somebody who has been in those shoes to be able to really understand what's going on.
And which leads me to Marianne. You're the first person who's read the book that I've talked to that really gets what I'm trying to say in many of the spiritual ways. And so I have so much enjoyed talking to you about the book.
Oh, well, thank you. It has been a real treat and a joy to be able to spend time talking with you about the book. And there's so much in there when we talk about, because, it would leave people two-dimensional if they also did not have a spiritual side. And people were very spiritual during that time. And so there's a lot of that, especially when we talk about Native American Indians. They have huge spirituality, and there's that connection as well. So, I liked how you were able to weave that in the story.
Well, I do have a great respect for their religion. They call him grandfather. We call him, God. And I think in the general context of the world, we're talking about the same person or entity. Let's call it an entity. God's not really a person. He's way beyond that. I think in the Bible it says if we actually knew who God was, it would, our brains would pop out of our heads, because the concept, we like to put a concept onto it, but I think that so many people, because they're uncomfortable with spirituality, they try to say, okay, it doesn't exist. And, I worked at the national labs, right? All scientists, okay? And they would go, when I would talk about spirituality and how in combat it kept me alive, they'd give this little, I said, okay, what's the formula for gravity again? Da-da-da-da-da, like that. I said, prove it. Well, Einstein, I said, no, prove it. You just told me, how do I prove spirituality? Prove it. Prove that there is gravity. Well, you can see that because of what happened. Thank you.
Well, it really, when you bring that into your story, allows people to have this complete, viewpoint. Because, again, I mean, otherwise, I don't think your characters would have been as so well-rounded if it had not been for, adding that point in as well. I think I have a few more.
Well, thank you. That's, yeah. Well, it obviously I had a lot of help writing it from God and from the spirits of the 7th Cavalry that helped me write it. And it just, I couldn't write it without doing it. So thanks for noticing that.
Well, and talk about noticing things. And when someone picks up your book, they immediately see the cover, which is absolutely gorgeous. And I understand,
isn't it?
Oh my gosh! You had this commissioned, right?
Yes, I went, a call for artists internationally, and I got some samples. And this wonderful lady named Lena from Lithuania, which is also the true name of one of the characters, as soon as, she had, the nom de guerre that they have, when they're doing the international. So I looked at some of her book covers, and I said, well, okay, I want to use you. And so here's what happened, Mary. It was just so phenomenal. She goes, okay, give me some idea of, something I could start with. And so the first time I talked to her or emailed, I said, okay, just think of, Leonidas, the Spartans, 300 Spartans against Darius. And then, she sent me a few little sketches and ideas she had. And she said, okay, I'm not familiar with, the history of the United States. And so I sent her chapter 12. And she came up with a rough outline that you see. The weapons were wrong, the uniforms were wrong, but the feeling was there. And the fact that she just, she read the book and read it and got it, and it was just so fantastic. And I guess I'm giving away a little bit, but if I also wanted some little clues for those out there that had been in the Green Berets. Right next to Custer's body on the cover, there's a broken arrow. And I told you what broken arrow was. And if you look on the back cover, there's crossed arrows with a knife going down the center of it, which is, that's our symbol, the Army Green Berets. There's the crossed arrows with the knife through it. And the biggest thing, she sent me, okay, I want to show tons of brass, or tons of, spent cartridges everywhere, just to show 31 Indians killed? No way. Each one of those 236 guys had 100 rounds. And the biggest complaint the Indians had, there wasn't any ammunition. And that's where Occam's razor hit me. The Indians didn't win. He was out of ammunition. That's where I started backtracking, that, hold on, if he didn't have any ammunition and he sent that message, why would another officer do that to another officer? Okay, what was Custer doing before this? And that's what my research was like. Okay, here's the fact. He ran out of ammunition. The Indians didn't beat him. He didn't have any ammunition left, but definitely used the carbines as war clubs, but that would only go so far. And the pistol cartridges were very effective at short range. And especially when you're out of ammunition, you can't fight back. So it's been, one thing is laid out in front of the other, and so many people out there that aren't spiritual don't see, what God's putting in front of them. Like that joke about the guy goes to heaven, and he said, oh, God, I thought I asked for your help and you didn't help me. Hold on, you were drowning. Yeah. What about the boat that came by and you said, no, God's going to help me, and you didn't do anything? What about the helicopter that came by and they lowered the little basket for you, and you said, God's going to help me? What was that? And that's what I feel so often with people that, they choose to ignore spirituality.
Yeah. Well, and there's so much more to this book. I mean, there are so many times during reading this, I mean, I would just cry. I mean, you did such a beautiful job pulling this all together and really weaving in not only the history, but the characters so well that people can get a really sense of being there at that time and what it was like. You did a beautiful job with that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. And yeah, people that saw the movie Titanic, everybody knows what's going to happen. And that doesn't change, what happened prior to that. And there was so much going on, not only with the Little Bighorn, but, I also go into how, Mexico was basically creating terrorists during the Civil War.
You know what? I was going to ask you about that, but I didn't because, there's so many things in here. I think a lot of people have no idea what's really happening at the time. And,
No.
I'd love for you to expand on that a little bit for our listeners because, you look at that and you're like, wait a minute, that was happening too during that same time?
Exactly. And the reason I connected the dots on that is my whole background is special ops and state-sponsored terrorism. And so I started reading some of the cavalry reports from, Bliss and several of the other forts that were out there before the Civil War started. And the Apache, all the Apache, traded with the United States. And they were friendly to the United States. And they had ancient weapons, and, they do what they had to do, but they'd stay out of the way of the U.S. Army. And there's this one story that is so obscure, and I only had, God's help to find it, but a cavalry patrol went out. This new major came to the fort, so he went out with a patrol, and they were ambushed by the Apache, and they were all killed. So the Apache came up and they brushed off their jackets because they had dust on them, and they thought they were federales. And so what the Apache did is they, put sage on the bodies, and they made travois, and they actually walked. They weren't on horses and led their horses. They walked the cavalry horses with the travois of the dead trooper on the back to the fort. And basically, said, we thought you were, Mexican Army. Now, does that sound like the same Apaches that were after the Civil War? No. And plus, the Apaches had Henry rifles. They had, they didn't have the old Springfields. They had Henry rifles. They had Winchesters. They had modern weapons. And when they looked at some of the serial numbers, they weren't listed, or they were listed as, for Mexico. Made in the United States, but came out of Mexico. And that's classic, state-sponsored terrorism. They gave the Apache a place to go to escape the Texas Rangers, who were constantly winning battles at 80-1 odds against the Indians, and, or the cavalry, and they just hop into Mexico, and the Mexicans would, take care of them, just so they could go back and murder and slaughter Texans.
It's interesting because when you hear that, that you were able to find that piece of history that gives that information, it really puts a different lens on what was happening during that time than when most people think.
Marianne, you know what the last name of that major was?
No.
Cole.
There you go.
It was my family name.
Wow.
So that's how I found out about it. It was like, now it's starting to make sense. Yeah.
How that all comes together. Well, I'm sure one thing that our listeners want to know, do you have a book 2 on the works? Because I know when people are reading this, and I'm doing the same thing, I'm rereading the book because there was like so much in here. I'm like,
Thanks.
ooh, and
Thanks.
you pick up different things every time you read books like this.
Yeah. You will. On mine, you will. You really will. There is so much little small details in there that are like, ooh, that's cool. Yeah, all right, yeah. Yes. Actually, it's part of a trilogy. And it's really the history between the Civil War and World War I is pretty much nothing. I mean, very few people know what happened. You know, about the only thing historic that anybody knows during that time period was the gunfight at the OK Corral, which, by the way, that was wrong too, you know, what they were saying. But I go into the incredible people that were, you know, became part of it. I mean, this is when Einstein was born, you know, during that period. And unfortunately, this is also when Hitler was born, when Mao Zedong was born, and when Stalin was born. So it was a different world making up some really sick psychopaths, but there are also some wonderful people. And so the trilogy ends at San Juan Hill with Teddy Roosevelt, one of my favorite characters in history. And there's a lot of, you know, little stories that go into it. The first female doctor, which is going to be actually one of the characters from the first book. And there's a whole lot of intel, you know, how the intel world started after the Civil War. And it's just really fun weaving everything in there. And you are going to love what happens to Tom Green in book number 2.
Ooh, I can't wait.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, you know, you've got all these great characters, and, you know, it's not, you know, and while the story ended for a few of them, there's still many more of them that the story continues. And I'd love to hear and read the next book when that becomes available. My goodness.
Well, actually something happened about the second book that I'd like to, is spiritual and sad.
Oh, yeah.
Is that Deb Nab introduced me to this wonderful veteran, and he was in a car wreck. And so he was at the VA hospital, and I know what it's like being in the VA hospital alone. And so I went to see him, you know, which is what real colonels do. And so he was like, "Hey, good to see you." I mean, he's from New Jersey. I could do a Jersey accent, but not that good, you know. And so we just started talking. He had read the book. He loved the book. In fact, his statement was that it's the first book I've ever read that I wanted to reach through the pages and tear her throat out. And you'll have to read the book, and it will become really obvious which female he's talking about. But so I went there, and we, you know, talked Army stuff, and then talked the book and everything like that. And Marianne, I got to tell you, I was stuck for the second book on the main female character. I didn't know what was going to happen. I had a really good idea of everybody else except the main female character. And I didn't, you know, I was like, okay, is she going to be okay? When's she going to? So I asked Steve, and I said, okay, Steve, look, you have really owned every character in the book. And so I got to ask you, what's going to happen to so-and-so? And he didn't even hesitate a half a second. And he goes, she's strong. She's strong. She's going to be good. She's going to be all right. And unfortunately, Steve died suddenly here this last month. And so it obviously stuck in my head because I went home immediately and knew exactly what to write for her. And she redeems herself. And so I really appreciate that. And so much help I've had from, so many people. And I love my readers. I never... I love the story, and I want the story to get out about the 7th Cavalry being heroes. They weren't cowards; they were heroes. And the more people that read the book, the more people, they go, "Wow, you can really write." It's like, well, we can write. I didn't do this alone. I had the help from how did you put it? Higher management. Upper management.
Yeah, upper management. And it's funny. I mean, even in your book, you talk about how Stephen King, he talks about when his characters come alive, although we're not sure exactly where that's coming from. But
yeah, I know. Yeah. Well, when I heard it, I think Johnny Carson might have even been when he was interviewing him. He said, "Well, you're such a prolific writer. You're really good." He goes, "I don't write. I take dictation," and it never made sense to me until I started this book. And I got to tell you, everything, the fight scene, I didn't write any of that. It was all taking dictation like Stephen King does.
Oh. Well, do you know, my goodness, David, I mean, we can talk for hours on this book. You are just a great individual. Love talking with you about Send Packs, and there's so much information here. Where can our readers connect with you and learn more about your book and be part of your community?
Well, my webpage, which is www.sendpacksbook.com, or Amazon. It's on Amazon. And by the way, I will have an audio version of the book next month. So you'll be able to listen to it in your car. And actually, Deb is doing the female parts. And so I think more people can enjoy it because, people are so busy. And as you found out, my wonderful, wonderful editor, just 48 Charlie is what she'll go by. The last page, hopefully I don't choke up because I've read it, obviously hundreds of times and it still chokes me up. But, she read the last part and she goes, okay, I know what you're trying to say, but what I want you to do is take these 6 pages and put them into one page to where when you hear that last line, you read that last line, the stage goes dark and the mic drops. And after about 50 tries, she sent me a text back, and she said, Mike has been dropped, and really, I mean, what do you think, that last line?
Oh, my God. I was crying.
Yeah.
I was texting you earlier today going, I finished the book and, crying and look like it, So, I mean, it's a cry that you're kind of going, gosh, I really want, to follow up on another book on this because there's so many pieces that you're like, oh, if it ends like this, it can't be done,
Yeah. Actually, over Christmas, one of the people that work here, in the complex, they were really excited to get the book, and they loved the book, and their mom came by for Christmas and was babysitting, and they came to me and they said, I got to tell you what my mom said. I said, what's that? She says, you go tell David that is the first book that I have read in my entire lifetime, and I'm old. She's probably younger than me, but I'm old, and I can tell you I've read a lot of books, but it's the first book I've ever had that just had me bawling.
Aww.
So I said, well, tell her don't feel bad because I had to rewrite it and do that stuff, and every time I go to that one point, and we talk, now that you've read it, that one point where there is no way that any normal human being can't get choked up at that one no. No.
Yeah.
It's with everything that's seen. And that was another thing that was just set up by, I could feel the back of my neck tingling as I was writing it because I could see everything. And it came out well, I think.
It came out very well. You should. I know as an author you should be very proud. I mean, it's impacting a lot of people and really having us take a hard look at what we thought history was. And, and this has happened many times where we have to really take a hard look at history and go, you know what, that might not actually be true. We may need to investigate this further and rewrite it,
Yeah, let the truth, that's one thing I learned in the FBI. I mean, eventually the truth is going to come out. And that's why we had, the guys that did the cold case files. You had been directly, recognized by, either the director or a lot of, AUSAs saying, this guy's really got his act together to do the cold cases, because the great thing about cold cases is that you get to look at it with a new eye and things could change, and the truth never changes. So you just look at all the stuff that changed and the stuff that didn't change. Oh, okay. Well, she's in Sacramento, California. I think we talked about that.
Yeah, we had a chat about that. And for our listeners, again, if you want to connect with David, you can at his website, sendpacksbook.com, and we'll have the link below. David, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you so much, Marianne. It's great talking to you.
Well, thank you, David. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and, of course, to talk about your new book, Send Packs. Again, if you'd like to connect with David and learn more about his book, you can at his website, sendpacksbook.com. This fascinating read's available on Amazon and on David's website. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.